So, OpenAI just released the new reasoning AI called O1. So, it's in preview right now. And you and I use AI every day for most of our work. It is a co pilot in a sense, it's a helper. I thought it would be interesting that we get together, talk about how, when it comes to developing, how this new model actually does. Because there's a lot of hype right now. I'm seeing on Twitter, everybody's like, this changes everything. Who even needs to hire junior engineers anymore?
hmm
And then there's a lot of other people that are talking about, like, it's not as good as you're thinking. So,
hmm
as somebody, Hunter, who is dealing with AI for coding every single day, what's your take?
Yeah, and obviously you see all the opinions, right? And I always like to look at like what's the whoever's giving the opinion, like what's their incentive, right? So when you got guys on Twitter that make their money by having a following on Twitter, then like you know, obviously they're the most sensational. Like this is going to change it. Why are we hiring software engineers? Like that's going to get attention and whatnot. Um, so yeah, I have obviously like I've played with it. Last night kind of dug in, started to do some coding stuff, and it was cool. I don't have like a firm opinion. I'm not like this is a letdown. I'm certainly not of the camp where I'm like this will change everything. So what is reasoning? Because that was like the first thing is like go and look into all the materials that OpenAI's put out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they have some good kind of explanations on there about what is reasoning, what do they consider it, and what have they fine-tuned this model to do.
Yeah. Well, you and I before were talking about the limitations of AI, and I was talking to you about how it couldn't reason. And
hmm
that was one of the differentiators between a human and an AI system. So I guess that's one of the big changes, quote unquote. So I guess, sorry to interrupt, but
no
how do
no
they
you're
define it?
Yeah, you're good. And like basically what they're doing, and you can see this in the interface. Um, they've designed this model to basically spend the time and the energy doing multi-step reasoning. So you go to the O1 model and you say, can you build me a React component that does a login, let's say, and integrates with something like Supabase to facilitate authentication. Prior to this model, that request would have gone to a large language model. It is pumped as an input to this model. It's numbers. It's not even letters. It's all vector embedding, and then it spits out a response from that model, and you get that response. And so, like if you asked it to code the component, it's going to do that. It's going to give you some code based on the output of that model one time. So now what they're doing with O1 is they're allowing it to do multi-step reasoning behind the scenes before it responds to you. So that same prompt, create me a React component that integrates with Supabase to perform login with a username and password. That same prompt, now you put it in there, and they're doing basically a self-feedback loop. They're passing a prompt to a model, and it's probably outputting. They haven't put technical details out about how the reasoning is actually facilitated, other than kind of the diagrams and stuff that they show. But it is outputting now, like, okay, here's 4 or 5 things that I should think about first before I go and actually code this React component. I should probably evaluate what are the best things to do this integration with Supabase. I should go and look at what does a typical login component look like on React. I should and it's basically just like any human would, right? It's not just kind of like blurting out the answer, but it's actually taking some time to kind of sit back and reason about it and come up with a more reasoned answer, which is sweet. uh the reason that I think my biggest reaction to it was I was kind of like I'm not saying it's not like a sweet model and it will be really useful for a lot of people. I think the thing that I was like let down by is I don't know, and granted I've played with it for about an hour at this point, so total caveat, maybe I'm a schmuck, and I don't
Because
know what I'm talking
they're
about.
limiting you to 30 messages a week at this stage. So no
Correct.
one's going to be some connoisseur of it unless they have 50 OpenAI licenses or something.
Right. That being said, I think the thing that was a little bit like it didn't necessarily change my world was this is something that this idea of multi-hop reasoning or multi-step reasoning or self-planning, or there's a whole bunch of different terms for it, but like it's something that people can do right now and are doing, just not in the OpenAI, the Chat GPT interface.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's really sweet in that sense that it's like before, if I wanted to do, one-off multi-hop reasoning with a GPT, like with Chat GPT, which I do a lot, like I've learned that the best way to get that ultimate component out is to not ask it to write it in the first prompt, but rather to say like, what things do I need to think about when I'm going to create a React component that integrates with Supabase? And then I'll ask it. So, before, where I had to manually kind of do that step-by-step logical reasoning process or prod it along, obviously it's built in. But as a developer, when I think about these AI models, like the chat is cool, but where the juice really gets squeezed is API integrations with other software. And I think that like basically this O1 model, it offers built in like the kind of planning things that a lot of people have been doing for a long time, CodeBuddy included, with, just programmatic reasoning. So it's a great model. I think one thing that I thought was also interesting and they will definitely make some money on, because you see in the news, OpenAI, they're raising a big fundraising round, but also, cash flow and profits are a consideration. And like I noticed that they made it so that you could access the API now if you're a tier 5 API user company, which comes with like you have to have spent I think it's $1,000 or something like that on the API. So I'm sure there's a lot of companies that are just chucking their $1,000 at OpenAI to get that to that 5th tier model to be able to just play around with it. So I thought that was kind of smart. And there's probably some PR plays there, but overall, yeah, I don't know, kind of a hedge, but
yeah. Well, we talked about in a previous podcast episode about exactly what you were talking about with asking the AI what it needs to know from you. So I guess that is a good advancement if it can just start doing that reasoning itself or add those context points or do that research. The thing that struck me most is a couple things. One, you need to prompt this O1 differently than you do previously. So the equivalent is it's almost like before you had to just throw a lot of stuff at it. You get quick reactions. You see where it's going. You start playing with that. And then eventually you started prompting, knowing how to kind of game it or talk to that system. Now, because it has all this other stuff, you need to be a lot more concise with it. And because it will go out and spend potentially a considerable amount of time figuring it out, you have to prompt engineer a lot more thoughtfully, a lot more prep into it before you hit enter. And that changes the dynamic significantly. So it's almost like you're working with a different caliber of worker, which is different. And it's also the first time then that you're now seeing like different types of AI that have different nuances and how do you need to actually interact with them. Just like you would, again, with a human employee, you have different ways of conversing with it, setting tasks, setting goals, all of this other stuff. So I thought that was a really neat change that we're starting to see now, is every model has its own speciality and its own caveat in the way you have to work with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like it does bring up the idea of nuance in AI, and like that's, because basically we saw this kind of inflection point in AI with ChatGPT, right? Which was like, this is the first model that kind of came to bear that is a general purpose, widely usable, widely useful AI. But I think like, and you've seen companies, I think it was Magic AI raised $100 million from Nat Friedman and whoever else to like build a 100 billion token frontier model for like being able to load your whole code base into the context window. And it just hasn't really panned out, this idea of like, once we got to a point of bigger isn't necessarily better, then it's kind of like, okay, now where do we move as an industry, as an AI industry, to like, because we can't just stagnate, right? And I think like I did some kind of concepting, a couple of years ago, I think about just back of the napkin stuff of what does it take to get to human level intelligence. And I think that there are, if you think about the human brain, we're not just a language machine, right? Mm-hmm. Language is part of what we do in our brains, but it's like just one part of it, right? There's also reasoning was one of the components that I identified, as a critical thing. I do think that emotion plays a role in like the way that humans think. And I think like my point being like, it's an interesting case of like, we're starting to build out the components of, AGI, if you will. And you're going to have to start being like more and more versed in what components should I be using for different things, right? Because this O1 model, like I think, and a lot of the material around it has been, it crushes like PhD level science kind of tasks, physics and mathematics and stuff like that. And I think that is like the true power of this thing. I don't think that, like, I think there's going to be a lot of people that try to use it for things that it's just not well optimized for. Mm-hmm. Because I guess like the other thing that I wasn't as impressed with is like the ability to control kind of the amount of reasoning that goes on and the output. So for example, I asked for a component to be built, and like, I went and did reasoning and thinking about how to do that, and it built the component, and then it also built an implementation, like here's how you could implement the component, and here's how you could register the component, and here's how you could change the component. Like it gave me way more than what I needed. And so that was like I was a little bit disappointed with that. But
it is feeling like we're getting into where these models are specific tools for specific use cases. And I mean, that's wonderful because again, we're starting to be an arbiter of what LLM version, what model is the best for whatever tasks. And then if you're a startup or a company, you can have a good positioning for yourself of figuring that out for your workflows or customer workflows and those pieces, because the costs are going to be substantial. And that's the thing about this O1 model, because it does so much reasoning. Like we said, with one prompt, you could generate, I don't even know how many tokens worth of spend just for one output.
Yeah,
and
I believe
they're talking about like potential of this with research for taking not just seconds, but minutes, hours, days, mm-hmm. or months trying to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. And so that's where also, you got to think about like you're setting this off just like you would be a person, but you're giving them the credit card, and then they're just going to get an output back with a bill. And you're like, well, that isn't actually what I wanted. And so that's going to be a different way of handling these systems.
And that's part of it too, is like that I was like, I wish I could see. So they there are reasoning tokens that are spent. So it's a context window of 120,000 tokens. Okay. And it's relatively on par with like previous models. It's not an order of magnitude above or below. I don't know what the actual numbers are. But a certain amount of those are spent on, they call them like reasoning tokens, which you as a caller of this model can never see, which like that part I was kind of disappointed by, is like, and I get it, right? They have their own proprietary concerns, and like the way that they're doing multi-hop reasoning is unique to them, at least at this point in time. And they don't want to just, show how all the sausage is made.
Yeah, I did see a thing where if you try to pry too deep into it, you get an email from their support. Mm-hmm. Like, because these LLMs naturally kind of will just tell you most mm-hmm. of the time, they put certain safeguards, but people are finding out ways of always bypassing those through whatever method, like leet speak or different things. But yeah, it's interesting that they don't want you to know how it's actually reasoning at this stage.
Mm-hmm. And it makes sense. And like, one thing I do appreciate, and like Sam Altman, like love him or hate him or whatever. There's been a lot of rhetoric, and it's honestly hard to tell anymore because it's just all secondhand stuff. But I do appreciate, and regardless of whether or not this O1 model is super applicable to me, like am I rushing to implement it and everything like that? Not quite yet. But I the thing I do appreciate is like, okay, if OpenAI, if their mission in this world is to achieve, and I believe this was part of their original mission statement, to achieve safe AGI, I think that they are, they're on the track and they're continuing to stay true to that mission in starting to provide the different components that will now lead to AGI. And like, yeah, maybe O1 doesn't offer me any capabilities that I didn't have before in terms of like facilitating multi-hop reasoning with a large language model. That's because I'm a developer and I can write code against the API, and we can define our own multi-hop reasoning, like prompts and methodologies and stuff like that. Great. But now this thing's sitting in it's sitting in ChatGPT and it's just open. Like, it is pretty sweet to be able to have my dad, for example, now go and, if he wants to do, he's a middle school science teacher. And so if he wants to do some sort of lesson or something, like, for him, this model represents like a quantum leap in how he can use AI to better help him do his job or accomplish any goals.
With this model, progress is going to come in very specific vectors rather than being the general. So you're seeing like these PhD science research, things like that, and they'll be able to be superhuman in some capacity there. But again, it falls apart when you're going to other generalities. So maybe we are seeing with these AIs, it being very focused and very tool oriented, again, rather than one tool that can do everything, the Swiss Army knife approach. Maybe it is, you're going to have that garage full of very specific tools that you can bring out for whatever specific task. So again, it's interesting to see how it's all coming together.
And that idea, by the way, is the way that AI research has existed for all of time up until, practically speaking, the release of ChatGPT, right? Like 10 years ago, there was no such thing as an AI model that was anywhere close to as generally applicable to tasks as large language models. Like 10 years ago, you were building not only a specific AI to do a specific type of task, but you were building an AI to specifically do a task. Like, you were training a model to detect cancer spots. That was what the model was for. And so, like, only with ChatGPT did we kind of get to this like one model to rule them all kind of mentality. But yeah, I think we're going to see a switch back into like, okay, we've kind of squeezed what we can out of this like huge large language model that we can train with the sort of computers that we have and the energy that we have, which might become an issue too in a couple of years. But yeah, I think we're going to see a shift into more and more optimization for particular types of tasks, and then size too, right? And and we haven't talked about that yet. Along with O1, they also released O1 Mini, which is, and they've released a 4.0 Mini as well. It kind of flew under the radar, except for application developers like myself, because it's not, you might as well just use 4.0 if you're on ChatGPT. But the idea of a mini model, I think, is like also going to become increasingly important and viable. So like, for those that don't know, like an O1 Mini or a 4.0 Mini, it's a version of the full model that is just pared down in the size of the model, which means it's not quite as smart, to crudely put it, right? There's a lot more technicalities than that, but it's not quite as smart, but it generally represents kind of the same, type of output, type of quality, and it's way faster and way cheaper. And I think like, yeah, that idea of building new AI models that are task specific is going to become, or task type specific is going to become really popular. And then the miniaturization of models, right? Like, I think there's a lot of waste right now. Like, the human brain only has, however many billion neurons. Like, we've gotten to the point where we're spending far more like computational power than the human brain has, and we're still achieving suboptimal results, like the issue is no longer computational power. It's like we're clearly doing a kind of brute force approach, and we're going to start seeing people kind of start to hone in on a less brute force. This is for multi-step STEM problems, or this is for whatever you want to call it, some semantic analysis, or what's the word? Sentiment analysis. That's something.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big things that they're touting about this O1 model too is that it has a lot more importance in its reinforcement learning over time. Mm-hmm. And so we're starting to see, again, the diminishing returns of let me absorb everything and then be able to do some magic because it can mathematically come up with a good answer. And more, like you're talking about, it's the context, it's the human part of it, it's all those other factors that are specific to whatever moment or things or industry, and those are where it's going to be more and more potent and then more and more effective. And so, I think we're just starting to see this is just a good example of the evolution of where these LLMs are going and where their limitations are, and then where they can overcome those parts of it. So again, I'm excited to play with it. I'm excited to see what people come with it. And I think for sure it's going to open up a lot of opportunity for people in terms of having that partner, like we talked about before, to do a lot of the heavy lifting that someone as an individual isn't able to do. But it's probably not going to necessarily just replace people in general.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I want to qualify my statements with I have a very specific way, because of our company and like our mission and everything like that. I spend a lot of time thinking about AI, building AI, working on AI, but it's a very specific problem that we're working on, right? Relative to the whole realm of problems. So my opinions are colored in how good is this O1 model for me, right? And it probably shouldn't be that way. Because do I think that, okay, here's a good example. So I do some like hobbyist electronic stuff, microelectronics. I mess around with Arduinos. I'm working on right now building for my wood shop a smart dust collection vacuum management system, right? So I only have one vacuum. I've got a lot of tools. The vacuum doesn't have enough suction to suck the dust away if you just put open hoses to everything. So you got to kind of close off the paths or whatever. So I'm building a smart vacuum system. It's based on Arduino, and it uses relays and current sensors and everything like that to control blast gates. Well, I have a degree in computer engineering, which means that at one point in time, I was, certified to be educated in hardware development, stuff like that, embedded systems, all that jazz. But when I went to write the code for this smart vacuum system, do you think that I wrote it from scratch? Absolutely not. Like, I went straight to ChatGPT. I found an agent on there, whatever you call them, the different ChatGPTs that's an Arduino. Somebody took some time to put some context in there about an Arduino, and that's how I wrote the code, right? And I maybe went in and tweaked a few things and did some stuff like that. But, I was able to, in an afternoon, create something that would have taken me days at the least, right? Because just the initial startup of that, it would have taken me days. I was able to create it in an afternoon, and I didn't really have to rely on any of my own specialized knowledge from, going to school for hardware development. It was pretty much just this is what it gave me, and here's what I need to tweak to get it to do what I want to do. And that was a pretty transformational moment for me because I think there's a lot of creativity out there in people. I'll go back to my dad. I think my dad's a really good example. He's a science teacher. He's math science savvy, knows a lot about a lot, knows nothing about software engineering, right? But when I did that, when I went through and wrote all the code for this Arduino to open the blast gates and whatever based on my logic, I could see that this is something that he could do, right? This is something that now this offers the sort of capability to bridge the gap between like, I know what's out there that's possible and I actually want to do it myself. And like, I can see how, now, and it will take time to trickle out, right? For people to understand that they can do that, understand how to do that and whatever. But like, that's super cool to me. Like, I want everybody that has ideas like that, like, oh, I want to build a thing that, does this very specific task in my shop that like, I don't want to commercialize it. I want to do it myself. I want to learn how it works. But there up until whatever, there's been a skills gap or a knowledge gap. And it really seeks to close that. And I think that's super cool. And I think O1 is like another step in that, right? Like you're trying to understand complex mathematics, multi-step stuff. Like you can now do crazy stuff today that you couldn't do 2 days ago. Yeah. And that is like super cool.
It's constantly closing the gap and that's the difference. I was talking with someone not too long ago about like a little app idea, and they're like, I don't think AI can do that. And it was all around like helping people with business plan ideas. Mm-hmm. And then now you get an upgrade and it's like, well, now it can do that. That's one of the cool things about when we do get these upgrades is it enables a lot of new capacity for people. It's interesting to again see how that's all going to evolve, because again we're at a point where in our business life where things have not evolved this quickly ever. You had computers, and then it took decades for that to really take stranglehold, and then you had the internet, which took years. Now you're going in a matter of days or months with these models because everybody is on the hype train of Cursor plus Claude can build apps in seconds, and then just discarding that at a whim because the new version of OpenAI's O1 is here, and then who knows, whatever Meta releases a new version of Llama, everyone would be like, O1 sucks. But we're now, each evolution in each step of these are having a dramatic impact on the paradigm that is, what can we do with computers? What can we do with AI? What can we do in business? How does this affect our lives?
And they're having a dramatic impact. But I also think like, and you've seen this since 3.5 to 4 to Llama to Claude, like the amount of impact or the amount of like, wow, is diminishing with each, as basically as the field gets more and more mature, it's less like mind blowing, right? Like I remember when I first played with ChatGPT, and I was literally blown away. Like I was like, this is magic that I never thought that we would see in our lifetimes, and I can't even comprehend how it works. And now like the new O1 comes out, and I have the nerve to go and play with it and be like, it's just doing multi-step. I've been doing this for a while.
Is that just the hedonic treadmill? The grass.
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
we're just
I think
jaded to it all.
Yeah. Like, and we were even talking about this, my wife and I, about like cellular internet, right? Mm-hmm. Like I remember when one of my parents got their first smartphone that had the ability to hotspot, right? And I remember thinking about like, so you mean to tell me that I could be driving down the road, right? Riding in a car down the road, and I could have my laptop connected to internet? Like that sounds fake and magical all at the same time, and I want it. And it's like, man, I wish that we could still all have that same sort of wonder, as these new things are coming out.
Louis C.K. has a story of, he was on an airplane, and he was telling this during, I think, like the Conan O'Brien Tonight Show or Late Night Show. And he's on an airplane, and they just announced to everybody that now you have access to internet on the airplane.
I've seen this sketch. It's hilarious.
Yeah, and everybody is like, wow, this is amazing. And then just a few minutes into the flight or something like that, it breaks down, and they apologize profusely. And he's like, the guy next to me, he's like, well, this is bullshit. Yeah. And he's like, how entitled are you that this magic that didn't know exists just minutes before, how quickly you're just like expecting it? And I think that that's also the way we're going with AI too. So I guess to sum everything up, is this a big step forward? Oh my God, yes. Mm-hmm. Is this going to be as big as everyone on the Twitterverse is saying? Probably not. It's not.
Yeah.
But man, I'm excited to see where things are going.
Yeah, I am too. And I think like and that's maybe I'm also a bit jaded too in social media, and I have a very uh interesting relationship. But like, when I see, and I think you sent me, like, somebody had tweeted the like GPT O1 performs, equivalent to junior engineers on these like leet code problems or something. I don't remember what they were. Like some
Yeah,
like test set.
it was the entrance exam, coding exams for Google to become a junior engineer.
Yes. Okay. Yes. And so then it was like, if it performs better than junior engineers, like, why would we ever hire junior engineers? And it's like, okay, first of all, that's probably an indication that like these entrance exams are not testing the right things. And that's been a narrative for a while, right? Like if you want to go work for a FANG company, you have to spend like 6 months doing interview prep for all these like very technical, very like you're not going to encounter these sorts of, they're very academic problems, right? It's like, how do you write like a depth first search on a binary tree using whatever sort of implementation or a doubly linked list? And it's like, yeah, I remember when I was in college and I did these problems too. Did the fact that I got an A in CSE 156 mean that I was ready to be a junior engineer? Like, absolutely not. I learned how to be a software engineer on the job. So I think like, I don't know, there's always going to be those sorts of narratives and like kind of attention parasites. But I feel like to get to the core of the problem, because, there's always some amount of, and myself included, anytime OpenAI like releases something new, there's always some amount of like threat, right? To like everyone. And it's natural, right? Like we've all seen Terminator. We've all like understood how things could go poorly with AI.
But it's very real. I mean, that's the thing. As tools
it's real.
Increase efficiency, jobs will be disrupted. And that's the thing. It's not a matter that all of a sudden at the flip of a switch, there's not going to be, call center people. But over time, that will go down. And just like junior engineers, and I think we're reaching out to a guest who made a big career change to become a developer. So I think that we'll leave this for its own episode on the topic. But there is a definite change right now in companies hiring for junior engineers and how you get into the industry because of these tools. So yeah, is it clickbait? Sure. It does the algorithm, work better when everything's insightful? Yes. But it is kind of fun too to see like what are the nuggets of truth in that fear, because it's not unfounded. It's not, the monster under your bed is fake entirely. There is, truly something lurking out there.
Yeah, I think what it shouldn't be a fear of replacement. What it should be is a signal, because fear's an important. Okay, so it goes back to what I was talking about before, that emotion is an important part of the human brain, right? Emotion exists for a reason, and as much as I would like to be a logical robot that just pumps out code, like, you cannot exist purely on logic. Fear exists in the human brain for a reason, and it's to prevent you from danger, right? So as a coder, like something comes out from OpenAI and I'm like, ooh, what is it? Like, I got to make sure that it, whatever. And so it's like, the answer is not to ignore that, but rather to dig into that and figure out what is there. Like, what is my brain trying to tell me in experiencing this fear? And what I think it is the job of a software engineer is going to radically change, right? I don't really code that much anymore. Like, if I had a tool that could measure how many lines of source code that I'm committing to the repository, like how many of them did I sit there and type out each individual character, and whether it's Copilot auto-suggesting stuff that I'm finishing, or whether it's ChatGPT or some other model. I don't code a whole lot anymore, but like, I don't feel like I'm less of a software engineer. It's just, you have to upskill and kind of change what is your value proposition to the whole equation of building software, right? And so, yeah, maybe like if you define junior engineer as someone who just takes tasks and bangs them out in a code base, like maybe in a year or two, I don't know, maybe that won't exist. But does that mean that these people, like, I think picking out a group of people and like junior engineers, which inherently just means like new software engineers. And it's like, why hire junior engineers? And it's like, well, partially because if you don't hire junior engineers, eventually all your senior engineers are going to retire or die, and you still need engineers, right? So it's like, yes, you have to still hire junior engineers because you got to feed your talent pipeline. And like, yeah, they might do different stuff than what they do now, but
Yeah, I think that's the nail on the head is the work that they used to do is no longer as valuable. And so now the skills that you need, the output that you need to get from them comes from a different set of skills.
exactly.
And so, yeah, architecture, fundamentals of problem solving, business logic, business context, all of those things are going to become more and more powerful. A lot of the threat to people who are your traditional programmers is the fact that maybe that moat that they had of the technical knowledge is not going to be as deep, and people who are more on the business side and not on the IT side are going to be able to do a lot of the tasks and responsibilities because of these tools. So again, yeah, everything that we used to know as the status quo, that again, going back to a computer programmer in the 70s typing on punch cards is a world different than a computer programmer in 1990, which is a world different than today. But we're seeing those shifts happen in a matter of days, weeks, and months rather than months, years, and decades. And so that's just where so much of it's interesting.
I do think too, like you talk about the moat, right? Of that, like technical people have enjoyed. I do think that's going away, and like I think it's fair, right? Like us software people, we've had a really good, and I'm not saying that that's going away, the run of like prosperity due to technical, competence or whatever, but like for a lot of years, you've been able to make a decent amount of money in technology just because you know how to code. And like a lot of times at the expense of equally talented people that just need code in order to make their idea work. And like it's been, really, really hard. If you're a startup, if you're a non-technical startup founder, like over the last 10 years, like more power to you, man, because it is tough to try to like, for a cost that's reasonable to get somebody to write you code to build your idea, because there has been that huge moat. And I do think it's starting to disappear. And like, I think that is a real thing, right? That like this kind of like island of exclusivity and prosperity that, we as software engineers have enjoyed just because we know how to code, like it's starting to go away. The ocean's drying up or whatever you want to call it. And we're going to have to like make it in a more kind of level playing field in terms of bringing value to any given construction process of software. And I think that's okay. And I'm fine with that. Like that's, the capitalist in me is like, that's great. And, survival of the fittest. And if there's still a place for that in software engineering, great. If there ever comes a day where there's a major AI that like I can say, build me a software that does this, that's also great, because there will probably be a whole bunch of softwares that solve a lot of problems for a lot of people that will make the world a better place.
Perfect. So, all right. Well, we'll end with that because we can keep going on many other tangents, and we want to keep it around 40 minutes. No, absolutely love it. We'd love to hear from anyone listening who's made it at the end as well. Have you played with O1 yet? What did you think about it? And what have you found to be successful in terms of actually prompting it? Because so far the suggested questions of is a hot dog a sandwich have not been quite as good, and I feel like I'm wasting my tokens on those.
What a waste, man.
I didn't realize it was limited when it was started, because they don't tell you that. And so I was like, I don't know what to ask it, so I just did.
What did it say? You didn't send me that one.
I deleted it. I didn't even read it. I was like, why did I do that? So,
non-tech. Yeah.
Anyhow. All right. But anyways, we will see everybody next week. Bye-bye.
See you guys.